Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Subplot A Course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction literary work on the second Tuesday of every month by casual fans just like you. I'm Stavros, and with me is someone who is working up to teaching his students how to ride giant desert worms, Charlie. Say hi, Charlie.
The spice.
It's already starting. All right, also with me is Vincent, who is tracking the addictive effects of spice on the American aristocratic elite. Say hi, Vincent.
Hey, guys. You know that spice is just called hot sauce.
It's true. All right, and finally, we're also joined by John, who thinks ornithopters are much more reliable than jets for science reasons. That's how he describes it. Say hi, John.
Hey, this is John, casual listener.
Today we're talking about Dune, written by Frank Herbert and published in 1965. And of course, you should be prepared for spoilers. So the plot of this novel, set in the far future, the galactic power is separated into three parts: the Imperial Throne, the Great Houses, and the Spacing Guild that has a monopoly on space travel. House Atreides, one of the Great Houses, is tasked with taking over the desert planet of Arrakis, aka Dune, at the request of the Emperor. Dune is great because it's the only place in the galaxy where one can mine the spice melange, which we'll talk more about later, but not so great because moving there is all part of a trap by the Emperor and the Atreides' enemies, the Great House Harkonnen. The trap is sprung, and the ducal heir Paul and his mother Jessica escape out into the desert, where they are absorbed by the desert natives called Fremen. Paul fulfills a messianic role for the Fremen, and he eventually takes over their leadership and then counter-assaults the Harkonnen and Imperial forces on Dune, and then threatens to destroy the spice on Dune in order to force the Emperor to abdicate the throne. That's the plot in a nutshell. But so let me jump right into the first topic here. So I'm going to complain a little bit here, something I don't really do right off the bat, at least. But I listened to the audiobook here. I did not have a good time with this. So, to be fair, the narrator was really good. But in the version I had, there were like 3 or 4 voice actors. But only like half the novels or half the chapters in the novel were voiced by the characters. And then at one point, the character that plays Paul's dad, that character dies, spoilers. And then they just bring him back as another character later in the book. And so I didn't have a good time with that. But along with that, it kind of something that made the audiobook, and something that you guys actually brought up, is how there are a lot of like crazy words and pronunciation and internal monologues happening like throughout this book, and it all kind of makes for, at the very least, a unique reading experience, but it can be a little bit crazy for an audiobook too. So how'd you guys feel about this? There's a lot of like crazy, like semi, kind of Arabic sounding words maybe.
Well, I was talking with you about it earlier, where you're telling me you're listening to the audiobook and it was hard. I was like, yeah, this author oftentimes doesn't say who's talking. We'll put thoughts in the random text of the book with italics. And so I was wondering, like, without the visual cues and like the paragraphing and all that stuff, I was just like, how do they even get this across?
I've actually done both. So I've listened to I think the same recording as you, Stav, and I've also read the entire text, and I actually didn't find it very confusing. So I think that I did see the same pitfalls that you guys did, but perhaps a couple of read-throughs, and it's not that bad. I don't know.
Maybe what I'm hearing from John Stavros is that your audio comprehension is not particularly good.
No, I think it's totally valid. I think it. Unclear.
So as I've only read the book, and this is the first time I've read it, so I ended up with the opposite problem where there's so much vocabulary and like crazy languages. So like as I read it, I'm pretty sure my brain did. You know that thing where you get things in books and magazines where it's like the first and the last letter are the same, but they jumble the rest of the letters and you can still read it?
Yes.
Dyslexia?
Well, no, it's those things that you see online where they like jumble up passages, but you can still read it because that's how your brain reads. Like, that's slowly what my brain started doing with like half of the words. So my joke with Stavros all the time is I'm like, there's like the quiz and the because that's kind of like I recognize the word, but like verbally my brain just like went over it.
So to be fair, because of the audiobook, I know how to friggin' pronounce the Quetzalcoatl. Unlike
That's
some
the wrong
people that
way
read
to
the
do it,
book.
Star Wars. I'm just kidding.
Though everyone agrees that Chani is pronounced Cheney, despite the fact
Cheney.
that
Cheney.
Yep.
yep.
It is. I mean, it's a dense book in terms of the types of words that are used. So I think that most readers, especially most Western readers, might have a difficulty doing it because I mean there are quite a bit of Arabic words, but there's also Greek and Eastern European and Latin and Aztec and stuff like that. It's challenge. It's a challenge for any single tongue.
So actually, comparing, speaking of like the Arabic and other influences, that kind of segues into the next topic, which is, are there direct analogs to the things in this book? So, talking about the spice, something that spice, something that the whole galaxy, or at least, prominent people in the galaxy are basically addicted to. You guys had kind of brought up that maybe this was some kind of oil analogy. And then the Fremen, maybe are they directly analogs of Arabic people? How do you guys feel about that?
They live in the desert and control the most valuable resource in the universe/world.
In a
And
nutshell,
use
yeah.
it to pull themselves out of obscurity into the leading classes of the universe.
I mean, part of the reason why I thought that was kind of a valid analogy was less because spice was addictive to everyone in the universe. It was more that the Spacing Guild needed spice in order to fly their ships, which is the only way to transport across the galaxy. So if they can't fly, nobody flies,
right.
Which means that basically cars, in the analogy, don't work anymore. Nobody has fossil fuels. So to me, spice was less of a tasty thing that you put in your food and more of a, hey, my car doesn't work
It's that
anymore.
too. All right, spice is everything.
Yeah, it's
man.
both. It's both. Petroleum products are very tasty, from what I hear. But essentially, it's
that's
like
where you get artificial flavorings. It is like an oil extract.
Good old dinosaur juice flavor.
yeah. So that's why the analogy works so strongly. Is that the Middle East kind of controls the oil. They also have people who live in deserts, which is very similar to the Fremen. And then they live in a harsh environment. They're used to difficulty, and the entire world's addicted to spice. So it seemed to make sense to me.
What do you think, John?
I'm skeptical. Well, I mean, let's put it this way. I think the analogy is quite good, but I don't think it stands up to like historical evidence. Like the book was published in 1965. The Middle East was certainly pumping quite a bit of oil in 1965, but like the U.S. was the largest producer of oil in 1965. So hardly is there an association between this global dominance of oil production and the Middle East. Certainly not to Frank Herbert, I don't think, unless he's very prescient. I don't think.
I was going to mention that exact thing, and this seems to be the opposite case of most of the times where I'm like, overpopulation, the 70s, what? But like it was this one, it's like, oh, it's written in the 60s before the Arabs became like, there's like the oil crisis and, all the more modern types of conflicts and everything like that.
Honestly, I'm not sure I totally buy the oil Arab analogy. I originally, when we were talking about spice, I'm just like, it's drugs. Everyone's addicted to drugs. But I'm not really sure there is a direct analogy. I mean, basically, you talk about what is spice in the novel, and yes, people need it to fly ships, but I mean, most of it is like Paul getting on like crazy drug trips and seeing the future.
Like I know. When you have some, it feels like you can fold space, but that's just your brain.
Are you sure?
Yes.
All right, just checking.
Sounds like someone's tried in the past.
So that's really interesting, actually, that you mentioned that, because although he's certainly made this quantity, he's made the spice like infinitely usable for it as an industrial product and so forth. But I think there's truth to what you're saying, because as opposed to there being oil production being monopolized by Middle Eastern countries in 1965, new types of drugs were being used and experimented on, and there was quite a bit of a movement around the potential for drugs to be enhancements or to have like real practical useful purposes for expanding mental capability and experiences. I mean, all you have to do is look at the electric Kool-Aid acid test. That book sort of it gives you a good explanation of just how far things like LSD and other hallucinogenic drugs were being, I don't know, popularized, I guess.
You could taste with your skin, I've heard. Like you
I'm
can
not sure
hold
I
a
feel about
lemon
that.
and taste lemon. I've heard that that's really bad for you.
Yeah.
It's a fair point.
Or the future, or folding space. All of these things sound like really bad side effects.
Yeah, I mean, basically, Matt. All I want to note is that even though there are some similarities with oil and Arabs, but I kind of just feel like the Frank Herbert was just like, what's like the, I need some drugs in my book. Drugs are great, and then this planet has to suck. And this is before the Star Wars kind of made overdid the desert setting, and he's like, what environment sucks? There's no water. Yeah. I know. I'll make some guys that live there.
So you're saying it's kind of like the whole thing where Tolkien's like, no, Lord of the Rings is not an analogy for the Nazis, even though that's what everyone says.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm saying is I can see why there are some similarities there, but I'm not totally convinced it's just a clear analogy to anything.
It might be like art imitating life, not like a intentional analogy or something like that.
Yeah, it's just some of these obvious things you just can't get away from, so you kind of make an analogy almost naturally. But
like
I think we digress.
Strong basis in terms of like the Arab language and like the religious references. I'm sure if it had been made after the 80s, once like a lot of that stuff started becoming like really radical.
Okay, so let's move on to something different. So obviously, we're a science fiction podcast, and this is qualified as a science fiction novel. But
Space spice.
Yeah, there is like a very limited amount of space in this novel. But to be honest, there are a lot of like kind of medieval fantasy sort of like of a feel to this book too, and on a tech level, there isn't that much like crazy science fiction tech in this novel, and it kind of gets explained away as like, hey, back in the day, like no one liked computers, man, so they just kind of outlawed computers, thinking
it's
computers.
The Butlerian Jihad. I read the dictionary. It explained these things.
Yeah, so that's a thing. I mean, he kind of uses that as a device to kind of explain the lack of tech in this book. The kind of most you get are suspensors, where you want to, have things float, or in the case of
float lamps, or fat people.
Yeah, exactly. But he kind of uses it as like, it's like science fiction, but like he kind of uses it an excuse, I feel like, to like he doesn't have to come up with like Star Trek level technical descriptions of stuff. He can kind of go back into the kind of cloak and dagger, fantasy medieval, things taking place in castles with, people mostly care about poisons and that kind of thing. He kind of uses a vague sci-fi setting to kind of execute a medieval fantasy kind of feel to the book. What do you guys think about that?
I totally disagree. As from a tech perspective, I don't know. Couldn't be more wrong. Like I think that he uses as a plot point in order to bring in all these elements which are really traditional. I think there's a marriage here of really traditional themes and like weapons, and there's this honorable portion to it, especially since the naming is all like Greek names for these families. So it's trying to go archetypal. And I think that's why he would name it that way, because I will say laser guns, ornithopters, hunter seekers. He goes into great detail about, or the still suits. He goes into great detail about some technological items, at least for 1965. And I think that it's there. It's just not necessarily. I think he uses it as a plot point to bring in these other elements.
I think that's fair. I mean, that's not to say there's no tech in here, but he definitely is like they live in a castle, and there's lots of sword combat.
Yes.
And
what? Oh yeah, I was gonna say the one thing he does go into particular detail about besides like spice mining is the like how shields and laser guns A work and B don't interact well with each other, which kind of explains away like why we can't just shoot each other with laser guns or bullets.
That's also a fair point. I think that could be another thing of like their tech exists, but because of this convenient plot thing where like they don't interact well, we're just not gonna have it in the book that much.
I figure shields are basically science fantasy, so you might as well say like if you shoot a shield with a laser, it causes atomic explosions, and like you're just like, yeah, it's just as real as shields are, period, like that.
Yeah, shields are real. That's a thing.
I don't know. I kind of strongly sided with John on this conversation topic. I would also disagree with you, Stav. I think it's because we're normalized to the idea of shields being a tech thing, and there's no way that shields would ever interact poorly with anything. It's like no, there's in anybody's world, shields can work in very different ways, and I don't think it's necessarily inconvenient. I think that there are a lot of really well thought out sci-fi elements to this book, to the point where I actually think it's way more sci-fi than say like John Carter and like the Princess of Mars.
Oh yeah.
Where a guy just falls asleep, wakes up on Mars, and it's like, hey, it's a sci-fi book, and all they do is fly around and throw things at each other. I'm like, no, it's like a caveman on Mars. And
I think basically it's like he gets a speeder at the end of the book, and that's like the entire sci-fi.
that's
and
all
they
you have in
and they
text,
have
so it's like-
John Carter. They also had terraforming or atmosphere terraform. What?
Yeah, but wrong book. But like, I mean, I think the point is still there. It's just that this book has a crazy amount of tech and a crazy amount of other elements as well, which makes it so rich. And I think that maybe dilutes the idea of like Star Trek is computers everywhere and flat screens and holograms and stuff like that. This book has tons of that stuff. It's just buried along with a lot of religion, along with a lot of like medieval stuff, and it's just really well thought out in my opinion.
All right, well, so let's move on to something slightly different. So as you guys recall, at the beginning of each chapter, there's a little epigraph by the Princess Irulan. And that character doesn't really even show up until the very end of the novel. It basically just to give Paul someone to marry so he can take the throne away from the current emperor who backstabbed him. For a while I was feeling really sad for her. And you got to think, this is a princess, obviously. Her dad's the emperor. She's been trained by the Bene Gesserit, so she's been, kind of, groomed to, take over the throne, or at the very least facilitate, someone important taking over the throne or whatever.
And space eugenics.
Yeah, exactly. So she's been groomed for this, and then suddenly Paul comes in, and he just kind of is like, yeah, I'm marrying her so I can take to the throne, and hopefully she's a good historian because the rest of her life's gonna suck.
Hey guys.
It's a horrible. He's really dooming her to some extent by this marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you think like the book gives no indication before they get married that she cares anything about Paul or the Muad'Dib persona or anything like that. But I mean, you could see by the epigraphs that she just has done all of this research, and I'm just kind of envisioning her as just she's gotten screwed by this guy. Technically, she's his wife. But she's just stuck in like a tower somewhere with like these tomes writing these like collections of this mother effer Muad'Dib who's screwed me.
It seems pretty positive about Muad'Dib. Yeah, so my 2 points about Irulan were one, I start halfway through the book, I started like scanning through all the titles of all the books, and I was like, there's a lot of different books that she wrote. This is from a lot of massive series on a lot of topics. And my second point is that dang it, I forgot my second point.
My second point is Jesus has a lot of stuff written about him, and in this like universe, I would say that Paul probably fulfills the role of Jesus in that he sees the future, knows all things, and is supposed to control everything pretty much.
No, but she writes like books like it's like Family Emperor, History of Muad'Dib, History of Arrakis. Like there's all different titles for different series that she wrote about these histories.
Yeah, but they're all centered around Paul.
I think that's almost exclusive. Yeah, I'm pretty sure almost all of them.
Like some of them, like if you read them, some of them are like a royal family history, like about the emperor and that sort of stuff. Like they're not all about Paul. They're mostly about Paul. But they're not all about Paul.
That's her claim to fame. It's that's the only reason why anyone cares about her. I feel like, and that's the impression I got. Just she doesn't. She probably doesn't have any kids. Point.
And she spoiled most of the book. Like, by the time Dr. Yui betrayed him, I already knew it was going to happen, right? I mean...
That's another really good point, actually. Like, she, in her epigraphs, you learn really early that Paul is Muad'Dib, and he's the savior guy, and that Yui betrays him, and all kinds of other, like, fairly important pieces of information that she just kind of gives away. And for some reason, I didn't really find it being that, like, I wasn't that upset by it. I was just kind of like, how is this happening?
I don't mind that. Like, there's plenty of times where I've known what's going into a movie where I know what's going to happen. I still thoroughly enjoy it, and I felt like this, like it's kind of its own little spoiler in the book where you're just kind of getting to it, and it's having you focus more on the depth of what's going on versus like the twist or the surprise.
Yeah, fair enough.
There's other surprises.
That too.
Indeed.
What, you mean like how Paul just knocks himself unconscious for 3 weeks randomly towards the end of the book? Because he decided that was a good time and not to tell anyone about it?
He drank some sacred liquid.
The dead worm water?
It's spice-based, yes.
He's on drugs. Spice or drugs. He's on drugs.
I thought the water of life is they drown a baby worm, which is like 9 meters long, and then you drink that water. Isn't that?
Let me ask a question. Doesn't tequila have a dead worm in it? And isn't tequila also somehow associated with the water of life? I'm not kidding about that one.
No,
Turn your eyes blue and help you fold space and see the future.
No, that part is completely out. But I have a feeling that there's a version of tequila which actually translates to the water of life.
Actually,
Yeah.
Mezcal? Is mezcal the water of life? I don't know.
No, it's called mezcal. So mezcal.
Yeah,
is
that's
the
what
worm in it.
I
Tequila.
You know what? We just need 10,000 years of space eugenics, and then it will be the water of life, and we can see the future and become the.
No,
Yes.
tequila makes you the Chris Chatterak. Or the, oh shit, I got sacked. Or the backtrack had a Mac. Or the, oh snap, Brad Six Pack.
Wow. I'm not.
I know what's getting edited out of this video.
All right, so let's jump around. So let's talk about the bad guys, the Harkonnens. So one of the big,
So fat.
yeah, he's so fat. So the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, he
What a bantha poodoo.
yes,
That's what I think every time I hear that.
he's suspensored Banthapoodoo. So really quickly to touch on this, I've kind of felt him. I kind of thought he was like almost like a comically hilarious bad evil guy. He's just kind of, he's obviously not visually appealing, and he hatches like, very complicated schemes. But then he just gets surprisingly real at some points where he just like, he talks about having a good time with little boy slaves and stuff. I was just like, whoa, too real.
That's almost
Too real,
involved in a murder plot against him.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Then he almost gets killed by a guy, that has like a poison needle.
No, I do like how his saddest point is he's like, well, I guess we have to kill Paul, but he's such a pretty little man boy.
Oh God.
The other thing where they constantly describe how has like big fat fingers and is constantly fingering his jowls or like his belly or his food or like his victims and stuff like that just adds this extra layer of like physical realness to the description that just makes you like cringe.
Yeah. I think that kind of added to the kind of like caricature of a villain for me.
Yeah. But it makes it feel like more visceral, like
Yeah.
like you can feel it versus it just feeling like a bad cartoon.
Yeah, like he just starts off as this caricature, but then certain things happen. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
that's
They
not
literally
right.
start him in the first chapter in the shadow with just his hand in the light on the globe, and then he has in a book, he has walks into the light with a visual description of him. And I was just like,
That's true. I don't know, John, do you have any feedback on Harkonnen? Was he your best bro?
Oh gosh, no. I don't think so. I mean, it's hard to. He is playing. I think it is. We get a lot of evil characters, and they're evil for a lot of reasons. And I think he was sort of. Herbert drew him as a character who is evil by excess, sort of, right? Everything is in excess. He's got an insatiable appetite for violence and murder and sex and schemes and power and money. It's just everything is to the excess. And I don't know if we get such a one-note evil character so often. So I actually thought it was interesting because it was different.
because I was just about to talk about like they contrast him with they almost make Fate Ralph a comparison to Paul, where he's fit and charismatic, and even at the start, describes how the Baron Harkonnen is into him because he's such a pretty lad or whatever.
Yeah.
But then towards the end, he becomes that character becomes his own sort of villain.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep, that's
interesting. I just feel like literature and movies and everything tends to paint bad guys as ugly people and good people as pretty people, and it's just hard. I mean, with the exception of a few people like Sephiroth and stuff like that, who are bad guys who are also very popular, partially because they're very good looking. It just means that if you're ugly, unfortunately, you're born to be an evil person in life. It's like, I don't like that. I don't like that much, but it just definitely seems like it plays out that way in most books.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we have to go to final thoughts, but there's so many things to talk about this one. We didn't even get through a lot of it, but I'll try to.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
I mean, as we're going along,
Yeah,
I think we talked about a lot of the stuff that's like later on what we were hoping to get to. Like,
Yeah.
you know, we didn't explicitly talk about space eugenics.
Don't
And
worry,
that was
fans.
important.
We'll revisit some of these topics, I'm sure.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Podcast part 2. Let's do another 30 minutes optional.
We'll do an after show. We're doing that next. But let's jump into final thoughts. So I'll go first. Overall, I really like this book. One thing we didn't really touch on was just the amount of research. It kind of reminded me of kind of the Lord of the Rings universe, just how in depth and researched everything was. So there was a lot of it I really liked. The spice and all that, the whole plot. Yeah, exactly. Even though it was drugs or oil, it gave a unique flavor to the novel, which I think has been very hard to replicate. So, and I think the mix of fantasy, medieval, and sci-fi really worked really well for me. So, I definitely liked it a lot. So let's go to Charlie. What do you think, Charlie?
for me, this is the first time I've read it. Everyone else has read it before or listened to an audiobook before, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, because as Stavros has had to deal with for the last month, it kind of blew my mind. Like, you know, for all the reasons Stavros already said, it's really well done, and it's like super researched. But on the other hand, just like things with like the spice is the source of everything on the universe, and it's on this one planet, and then all the crazy vocab and the space is of future visions, and the way it's written. Like, my favorite things are things that are super compelling, but somewhat nonsense, or like you just kind of got to buy into it. And this hit that like right in the sweet spot where I was just totally into it. So I liked it a lot.
All right, awesome. How about you, John?
Yeah, I agree. The mix of classical themes and identifiable hero sort of tropes. I thought that it was easy to read. It was a fun, exciting story, and it sort of lures you. It lures you with a sense of we already know what's going to happen. You know, there's these sort of interludes from Irulan throughout the book, and it lures you in the sense that you're going to know what's going to happen, but there's plenty of surprises along the way. It's called a masterpiece by many. I think it rises to that level.
Awesome. Good points. All right, Vincent.
I think that the book is amazing for many of the reasons why Charlie and John brought up. I would add that if I had to rate books, I would rate it by the amount of time that we have left at the end of the podcast and how many ideas we have left that we wished we could talk about. I think this book has probably won that award in terms of, oh my God, there's so much more that I wish we could talk about because the book is really cool. We didn't even get at all into religion. And this book does a really good job of creating a religion and not only making that religion interesting, but they're part spies, they're part eugenics, and there's just so much going on that there's a reason why the book goes on for many, many prequels and sequels and spin-offs and movies and things like that. I would say that one of the funnest things about reading this book is actually talking about it with this group of guys. I think that Charlie just constantly said spice all month long, which made it a really fun. And I actually
Is Charlie
really,
okay? I mean,
I envy.
is he on drugs?
I don't know. I envy Charlie because it's his first read through, and if any of you listeners out there have never read Dune, it's totally worth it, regardless of the type of person you are. Like, there's some books like Ready Player One.
Yeah, it's weird enough that I know some people would probably like. I've seen things online where people are just like, "What the heck is this garbage?" So
Backtrack, Counter Attack, Quack Quack, Floppity Flap.
NHS right in the mental.
Man, it's amazing. So I'll end on that.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I think we're out of time, if not over. So let's wrap up here. As usual, if you have any feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotofcourse@gmail.com or on Twitter at @subplotpodcast. And for next month's episode, we're going to be talking about Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer and published in 2014. We actually saw the movie recently. Charlie and I did, at least. We'll be talking about that next time. So say goodbye, everybody.
There will not be as much spice next time.
Adios.
Catch us on Instagram and listen to our recordings. Thanks.
Are we on Instagram?